In 1680, Isaac Newton, the man who would give humanity the laws of gravity, the laws of motion, the mathematical language of the modern universe, sat alone in his study at Cambridge and copied out by hand 14 lines of text that he believed contained the secret of creation itself. He translated them from Latin into English. He wrote a commentary. He filed the pages among his private alchemical papers, where they would remain hidden for over 200 years. They are still there today, in the King's College Library, Kane's Manuscript 28. The 14 lines came from a document called the Emerald Tablet, a text attributed to a figure the ancient world knew as Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, a being the Egyptians called Thoth. Newton was not the first to be drawn to this text. Albertus Magnus studied it. Roger Bacon translated it. John Dee, the court astrologer of Elizabeth I, spent years trying to decode it. For over 1,000 years, some of the finest minds in the Western world believed that these few cryptic sentences held the key to the transmutation of matter, the nature of the cosmos, and the architecture of the soul. But the 14 lines Newton translated are only the surface. There exists another text, longer, stranger, and far more ambitious, that claims to be the full, unabridged teaching of that same ancient figure. It is called the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, and it is not a summary, it is not a commentary, it is a first-person account written in a voice that says, "I am Thoth, I am tens of thousands of years old, I built the Great Pyramid, I conquered death, and I am going to tell you how." Whether any of this is true, who actually wrote this text, when and why, is a question we will examine tonight with care. The modern origins of the tablets are contested, and the man who brought them to public attention is one of the more enigmatic figures in the history of American occultism. No museum holds the original tablets, no archaeologist has catalogued them. And yet this text has been read by millions. It has shaped spiritual traditions across the world, and its ideas about consciousness, about time, about hidden realms beneath the earth, and an ancient war between forces of light and darkness, continue to reach people with a power that is difficult to explain and impossible to ignore. Tonight, we're going to walk through the Emerald Tablets of Thoth from beginning to end. Every teaching, every claim, every strange instruction. We will trace the historical Thoth of ancient Egypt, follow his transformation into the thrice great sage of the Greek world, meet the man who said he translated these tablets in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, and then enter the world the tablets describe, a world of sunken continents, interdimensional beings, serpent-headed infiltrators, hidden halls beneath the ocean floor, and a cosmology so vast it makes the known universe feel like a single room in an infinite house. But all of that can wait. For now, let the room grow quiet. Let your breathing slow. This is a story that was meant to be received in stillness. A transmission, its author says, that only works when the mind is calm and the heart is open. Whether you take that literally or figuratively, there is wisdom in the approach. So close your eyes, if you wish. Let the weight of the day settle. And let us begin where the tablets themselves begin, in a city that no longer exists, on an island that sank beneath the ocean, in an age so remote that even the pyramids had not yet been dreamed of. Before we enter the world of the Emerald Tablets, we need to understand the figure at their centre. Because Thoth is not an invention of the text we are about to explore. He is one of the oldest and most important deities in the entire Egyptian pantheon, a god whose worship stretches back to the very earliest periods of recorded history, and whose influence extends far beyond the borders of the Nile Valley. The Egyptians called him Jehuti. The name likely means, "he who is like the ibis," a reference to the long-beaked wading bird that was sacred to him. In Egyptian art, Thoth appears most often as a man with the head of an ibis, carrying a scribe's palette and reed pen. Sometimes he takes the form of a baboon, seated with its paws on its knees, a crescent moon balanced on its head. The Egyptians noticed that baboons chattered at sunrise, and interpreted this as the animals greeting the dawn, an act of cosmic acknowledgement that suited the god of wisdom and the keeper of time. Thoth was credited with extraordinary things. He was the inventor of writing, not just the physical act of inscription, but the concept of language itself as a tool for organizing reality. He created the hieroglyphs, the sacred script that the Egyptians believed had the power to shape the world. He invented mathematics. He invented the calendar. Specifically, the 365-day calendar that replaced the older, less accurate 360-day cycle. According to one myth, he won the extra 5 days by gambling with the moon in a game of drafts, and those 5 additional days of light were added to the end of the year, allowing the sky goddess Nut to give birth to her children, Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder, on days that existed outside Ra's curse. He was the scribe of the gods, the recorder of divine events, the secretary of the sun god Ra. Every night, when Ra descended into the underworld aboard his solar bark, Thoth stood at his side, using his magic to repel the serpent Apep, the embodiment of chaos, and to ensure that the sun would rise again. He was the mediator between warring deities, the diplomat who resolved disputes between Horus and Set when their struggle for the throne of Egypt threatened to tear the cosmos apart. But Thoth's most famous role, the one that would echo through millennia, was his function in the afterlife. In the Hall of Truth, where the dead were judged, it was Thoth who stood beside the great golden scales. As the heart of the deceased was weighed against the white feather of Maat, the feather of truth, of justice, of cosmic order, it was Thoth who recorded the result. If the heart was light, balanced, free of sin, Thoth inscribed the verdict and the soul was admitted to the eternal paradise of the Field of Reeds. If the heart was heavy, weighed down by a lifetime of cruelty and ingratitude, it was fed to the demon Amit, the devourer, and the soul ceased to exist. A second death, permanent and absolute. Thoth was the witness. Thoth was the recorder. Thoth held the pen that wrote the final chapter of every human life. His cult centre was the city the Greeks called Hermopolis, the city of Hermes, known to the Egyptians as Kamenu. It was located in Upper Egypt, and from its temples the worship of Thoth spread across the entire country. Archaeological excavations near Hermopolis and at Saqqara have uncovered vast underground catacombs containing millions of mummified ibises and baboons, offerings to the god of wisdom from pilgrims who travelled from every corner of the kingdom. The sheer scale of these devotional sites speaks to the depth of reverence the Egyptians held for this deity. He was not merely respected, he was essential. Without Thoth, there was no writing, no knowledge, no calendar, no justice in the afterlife, no protection for the sun during its nightly voyage. Without Thoth, the universe could not function. The earliest evidence of Thoth's worship dates to the pre-dynastic period, before 3150 BC, making him one of the very oldest deities in Egyptian religion. His name appears in royal cartouches of New Kingdom pharaohs. The name Thutmose, borne by 4 great pharaohs, literally translates as born of Thoth. At Thoth Hill, the northernmost point of the Theban necropolis, archaeologists discovered the oldest known temple in all of Thebes, a stone structure dating to the Archaic period, around 3000 BC, found beneath a later mud brick temple, built by Pharaoh Sankara Mentuhotep III, who ruled around 2000 BC. Fragments of 3 baboon statues sacred to Thoth were found among the ruins, the very reason the site bears his name today. Thoth was not a minor god, he was fundamental. And then something remarkable happened, something that would give this ancient deity a second life, far beyond the borders of Egypt, stretching across the Mediterranean world and deep into the intellectual history of the West. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, 2 ancient civilizations collided. Greek philosophy met Egyptian mysticism, and from that collision emerged one of the most influential intellectual traditions in human history. The Greeks recognized in Thoth a mirror of their own god Hermes, the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls to the underworld, the patron of travellers, thieves, and, crucially, of those who sought hidden knowledge. Over time, these 2 figures merged into a single syncretic deity known as Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the Thrice Great. The name reflected his triple mastery, as priest, as philosopher, and as king. A body of writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus began to appear in Greco-Roman Egypt from around the 1st century BC onward. These texts, collectively known as the Hermetica, constitute one of the most extraordinary collections of mystical literature ever produced. They divide roughly into 2 categories. The technical Hermetica deal with practical matters: astrology, alchemy, the creation of talismans, the healing properties of plants and stones, and the invocation of divine powers. The philosophical Hermetica The works that would later be gathered into the Corpus Hermeticum address the deepest questions of existence, the nature of God, the structure of the cosmos, the relationship between the human mind and the divine, and the path by which the soul ascends from the material world back to its source in the infinite. These texts circulated widely. They were translated from Greek into Latin, Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, and Middle Persian. They crossed cultural boundaries with unusual ease, speaking to Christians, pagans, Gnostics, and early Islamic scholars alike. When the Arab conquests swept across the Middle East and North Africa in the 7th century, a new generation of Arabic-speaking intellectuals received, translated, and expanded upon this Hermetic inheritance, producing works of their own under the name of Hermes. And among these Arabic works was one that would become the single most famous text in the entire Hermetic tradition, a compact cryptic document that claimed to contain the secret of all creation in just a few enigmatic sentences. It was called the Tabula Smaragdina, the Emerald Tablet. The original Emerald Tablet, not to be confused with the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, which we will come to shortly, is a very brief text. In most translations, it runs to barely a page. Its earliest known versions appear in Arabic treatises from the 8th to 10th centuries, most notably in a work called the Book of the Secret of Creation. The central narrative describes a figure named Belinus, a legendary version of the philosopher Apollonius of Tyana, who discovers a hidden vault beneath a statue of Hermes. Inside the vault he finds an old man seated on a golden throne, holding a book in one hand and a tablet of emerald in the other. On that tablet is inscribed the secret of the prima materia, the primal substance from which all things in the universe are formed. The text of the Emerald Tablet is stunningly concise. Its most famous line, translated and retranslated across centuries, reads, "That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above, to accomplish the miracles of one thing." This single sentence, commonly shortened to "as above, so below," became the foundational principle of Western alchemy, the philosophical key that generations of seekers believed could unlock the secret of transmuting base metals into gold, of creating the philosopher's stone, of achieving immortality itself. The Emerald Tablet was translated from Arabic into Latin in the 12th century. Scholars have attributed this translation to various figures, with Plato of Tivoli, an Italian mathematician and astronomer working in Barcelona around 1134 to 1145, and Hugo of Santala among the most commonly cited candidates. From that moment, the text entered the bloodstream of European intellectual life, the same lineage of scholars we encountered at the beginning of tonight's journey. From Albertus Magnus to Newton, the Emerald Tablet was treated not as a curiosity but as a key. The question was always the same: what exactly does it unlock? This is the intellectual tradition that leads us to the text we're exploring tonight. The idea of Thoth as the original teacher of humanity, as the keeper of hidden knowledge, as the being who inscribed the laws of the universe on a tablet of imperishable green stone. This idea is not modern. It is thousands of years old. It has been carried through Egyptian temples, Greek philosophical schools, Arabic translation houses, medieval monasteries, Renaissance courts, and the laboratories of the scientific revolution. And in the early 20th century, that same hunger for the wisdom of Thoth would surface again in an unexpected place, the American West. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, the text we are reading tonight, did not emerge from an archaeological excavation or a dusty corner of the British Museum. They came from the mind, or the channeling, or the imagination, depending on what you choose to believe, of a man born Claude D. Dodgen in Sulphur Springs, Oklahoma, sometime around 1898 or 1902, depending on the source. Dodgen would later adopt the name Maurice Doreal, or simply Doreal, and under that name, he would build a spiritual organization, attract thousands of followers, write volumes of esoteric teachings, predict nuclear apocalypse, relocate an entire community to a mountain valley in Colorado, and produce the single most widely read text associated with the name of Thoth in the modern era. As a young man, Dodgen developed an appetite for fantasy, science fiction, and the occult. He claimed to have spent 8 years in Tibet studying with advanced spiritual masters, a claim that has never been independently verified, and which some biographical records appear to contradict. He also claimed to have visited a hidden occult center inside Mount Shasta in Northern California. In one account, guided there by 2 Atlantean beings he said he encountered in Los Angeles around 1931. Mount Shasta was already by the early 20th century, a fixture of American mystical geography. By around 1930, Doreal had established the Brotherhood of the White Temple in Denver, Colorado, though the organization was not officially incorporated until 1942. The Brotherhood blended elements of Theosophy, the late 19th century movement founded by Helena Blavatsky, which taught that hidden masters guided the spiritual evolution of humanity, with ideas drawn from Kabbalah, Eastern mysticism, New Thought philosophy, and Doreal's own visionary experiences. He wrote prolifically, producing over 100 pamphlets on topics ranging from Atlantis to astral projection, from the symbolism of the Great Seal of the United States to the nature of vitamins. It was in this period, most likely in the late 1930s, with the first known edition appearing around 1939, that Doreal published the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. He claimed that during a visit to the Great Pyramid of Giza in 1925, he had been granted access to a set of ancient tablets made of an indestructible emerald green substance, inscribed with characters in the original Atlantean language. He said he was permitted to translate and retain a copy by a figure he called the Great White Lodge, the same order of advanced beings that he believed guided human evolution from behind the scenes of history. Modern scholars have identified clear literary influences in the text. Certain passages bear a striking resemblance to the weird fiction of H.P. Lovecraft and his circle of writers, particularly the work of Frank Belknap Long, which was flourishing in the very same pulp magazines Doreal would have had access to during the 1920s and 1930s. We will encounter these parallels later when we reach the passages in question. The Theosophical movement, which we will also explore in depth, provides the broader cosmological framework, with its emphasis on root races, lost continents, and hierarchies of ascended masters. And the original Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, along with the broader Hermetic tradition, clearly inspired the format and the name. None of this, however, settles the question of the text's value. A text can be modern in origin and still contain ideas of extraordinary depth. A person can draw on literary and philosophical sources and still produce something that transcends those sources. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean have been read, studied, and meditated upon by millions of people. They have inspired artists, musicians, filmmakers, and spiritual practitioners. They have been discussed in academic papers, debated on internet forums, and recited in ceremonies. Whatever their origin, they have taken on a life of their own, and it is that life, that text, that world of ideas that we are entering now. The tablets begin with a voice, a first-person voice, and that voice belongs to someone who says he remembers. He remembers a city called Kewa, on an island called Undal, one of the great islands of Atlantis. He remembers a civilization that was, in his telling, immeasurably old, founded in an age so remote that the numbers lose their meaning. The tablets place the era of Thoth's birth at approximately 36,000 years before the Common Era, a date so deep in prehistory that it precedes the entire known timeline of human civilization by tens of thousands of years. At that time, according to mainstream archaeology, our ancestors were making stone tools and painting the walls of caves. According to Thoth, they were building a civilization of crystalline towers and flying craft, governed by a hierarchy of priest-kings who had discovered the secret of eternal life. Thoth says he was born into a lineage of immortals. His father, whom the text names Thotme, was the keeper of the great temple on the island of Undal, a structure that served as a bridge between ordinary humanity and a class of higher beings called the Children of Light. These were not angels in the traditional sense, nor gods as the later Egyptians would understand them. They were described as evolved souls, beings who had completed the cycle of human incarnation and ascended to a higher plane of existence, but who chose to remain connected to the human world in order to guide and instruct. From childhood, Thoth says, he was trained in what the text calls, quote, zero. The phrase is never fully defined. It encompasses spiritual disciplines, scientific knowledge, methods of consciousness expansion, and techniques for manipulating forces that the text describes as existing beyond the physical plane. His education was rigorous, demanding, and unlike anything in modern religious or academic training. It was closer in its contours to what we might call initiation, a progressive unveiling of hidden truths, each layer of knowledge building upon the last, each revelation requiring a greater capacity for understanding and a greater discipline of will. At a pivotal moment in his training, Thoth says he was summoned before a figure called the Dweller, a mysterious, semi-divine master who resided in the deepest chamber of the temple. The Dweller is one of the most enigmatic figures in the text. He is described as neither fully human nor fully divine, but as something in between, a consciousness that has existed since before the founding of Atlantis, watching and guiding from the shadows. It was the Dweller who granted Thoth what the text calls, quote, one, a power or a knowledge that freed him from the cycle of ordinary death and rebirth, allowing him to move at will through time, through space, and into the hidden dimensions that the tablets call the halls of Amenti. But Atlantis, despite its wisdom and its power, was not immune to corruption. The tablets describe a slow decay, a spiritual decline in which the people of Atlantis turned away from the light and began to experiment with forces they did not fully understand. They opened what the text calls ___2__, doorways into other planes of existence, and through those doorways came things that should not have been invited. Formless entities, beings of shadow, forces aligned with darkness and chaos that began to infiltrate the island civilization from within. We will return to these beings later. They are among the most disturbing and controversial figures in the entire text. For now, it is enough to know that the corruption spread too far to be reversed. The Dweller, seeing that the civilization could not be saved, caused a cataclysm. The seas rose, the islands shook, Atlantis sank beneath the waves. Only a remnant survived, preserved, the text says, by the Dweller's intervention, and from that remnant Thoth gathered a company of Atlantean survivors, boarded what the text describes as a great aerial craft, a spaceship in the language of the translation, and fled across the ocean to a new land. That land was Egypt. The text calls it Kem, the Black Land, named for the rich, dark soil deposited by the annual flooding of the Nile. And it is here that the story of Thoth shifts from mythology to something that begins to intersect, however tenuously, with the physical world we know. According to the tablets, when Thoth and his Atlantean companions arrived in the land of Kem, they found a primitive people, cave dwellers, the text says, living without civilization, without writing, without any of the arts or sciences that the Atlanteans had perfected over millennia. Thoth describes subduing these people not through violence, but through displays of advanced knowledge and technology that must have appeared, to those who witnessed them, as the work of gods. He introduced them to civilization. He taught them to build, to cultivate the land, to organize their society. He sent Atlantean teachers in many directions, north, south, east, and west, to establish colonies and to spread the remnants of Atlantean knowledge across the world. This detail is worth noting because it echoes a pattern found in the mythologies of many ancient cultures. The idea of a civilizing figure, a culture bringer, who arrives from across the sea and teaches humanity the foundations of organized life. The Sumerians had Oans, a being described by the Babylonian priest Berossus as emerging from the Persian Gulf, half man and half fish, who taught the people of Mesopotamia writing, arts and sciences. The Maya had Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, who came from the east and brought the arts of civilization. The Inca had Viracocha, who rose from Lake Titicaca and taught the people agriculture, architecture and governance before departing across the ocean. In nearly every corner of the ancient world there are stories of a wise being who arrived from elsewhere, lifted humanity out of ignorance, and then departed, leaving behind knowledge, monuments, and a promise to return. Whether these stories reflect a shared historical memory, a universal human archetype, or the common structure of storytelling itself, is a question that has occupied scholars for generations. What the Emerald Tablets do is locate Thoth firmly within this tradition, presenting him not as a god to be worshipped, but as an advanced being who once lived among us and whose knowledge is still recoverable, if we know where to look. And the place to look, according to Thoth, is beneath the most enduring structure on the face of the earth. The tablets claim that Thoth, not Khufu, not Cheops, was the true builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza. This claim places the construction of the pyramid not in the 4th dynasty, around 2560 BC, but tens of thousands of years earlier. Mainstream Egyptology firmly dates the pyramid to Khufu's reign based on workers' quarry marks found inside the structure, the architectural context of the Giza Plateau, and the broader trajectory of pyramid construction in Egypt. The claim of the tablets is, from an academic perspective, unsupported by any archaeological evidence. But the tablets do not present the pyramid as a tomb. They present it as a machine, a device for channeling cosmic energy. Thoth describes placing a crystal at the apex of the pyramid, designed to draw down forces from the cosmos and concentrate them on the gateway below. The gateway, in this telling, is the entrance to the halls of Amenti, the hidden realm that functions as the spiritual heart of the text. Before descending into the halls of Amenti himself, Thoth says he buried his aerial craft beneath the earth and erected a great stone figure above it as a marker, a sentinel, to stand guard until a future time when humanity would need the craft again. That sentinel, according to the text, is the Sphinx. The Sphinx, the oldest and most mysterious monument in Egypt. A figure that has no inscriptions, no clear dedication, no definitive dating. A figure that, according to the geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, may show signs of water erosion on its enclosure walls. Erosion that, if his interpretation is correct, could suggest its construction dates back thousands of years before the conventional estimate of around 2500 BC. Schoch first presented this hypothesis at the Geological Society of America meeting in 1991, and while it remains highly contested among mainstream Egyptologists and other geologists who propose alternative explanations for the erosion patterns, it has fueled ongoing debate about how much we truly know about the age of the Caesar monuments. The tablets, for their part, seize upon this ambiguity and claim the Sphinx as Thoth's creation, a marker above buried technology, a guardian of secrets that will not be revealed until the world is ready. Having established civilization in Egypt, having built the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, Thoth says he ruled as king for approximately 16,000 years. This number is, of course, impossible by any conventional standard of human lifespan. But within the logic of the tablets, within a cosmology where consciousness can be sustained indefinitely through specific techniques, it is presented not as metaphor but as fact. And it is during this immense span of time that Thoth says he descended into the halls of Amenti, leaving behind priest guards to watch over his records, and entering a realm that forms the spiritual axis of the entire text. The halls of Amenti are the most important concept in the Emerald Tablets. They appear again and again throughout the text, sometimes as a physical location, sometimes as a state of consciousness, sometimes as both simultaneously. Understanding what Thoth means by the halls of Amenti is the key to understanding everything else in the tablets. The word Amenti itself has deep roots in Egyptian religion. In the traditional Egyptian cosmology, Amenti, or Amentet, refer to the west, the place where the sun set, and by extension the realm of the dead. It was the entrance to the Duat, the underworld through which the sun travelled during the night before being reborn at dawn. The goddess Amentet personified this western realm, and she was often depicted welcoming the newly deceased into the afterlife. Thoth takes this ancient concept and transforms it into something far more elaborate, a hidden dimension, a gateway between planes of existence, a place where the most advanced beings in the cosmos dwell in eternal vigilance over the progress of humanity. In the tablets, the halls of Amenti are described as existing deep beneath the surface of the earth, specifically beneath the sunken remains of Atlantis, far below the floor of the ocean. They contain two primary spaces, the Hall of the Dead and the Hall of the Living, both bathed in what the text calls the fire of the infinite, a light that is not physical light, but something more fundamental, a radiance that sustains consciousness itself. At the centre of Amenti there grows a figure that the text calls the flower of life, a great, flaming, ever-expanding source of light and vitality. This is not a plant in any biological sense. It is described as a living force, a wellspring of the energy that animates all existence. Around this flower, seated in a circle of 32 thrones, are the children of light, evolved beings who descended from higher realms in the distant past to dwell in Amenti and to serve as guides for humanity's evolution. These 32 beings are not static. Every 100 years out of each 1,000, the text says, their physical forms must be recharged by the light of the flower of life. Between these awakenings, their souls roam freely through the bodies of living human beings, entering the minds and hearts of people on the surface, teaching and guiding from within, shaping the course of history through subtle influence rather than direct intervention. They are, in this telling, the hidden teachers of humanity, the unseen hands that guide prophets, artists, scientists and reformers toward insights they could not have reached alone. This idea, that higher beings operate through human vessels, inspiring from within rather than commanding from above, is not unique to the Emerald Tablets. It appears in the Bodhisattva tradition of Mahayana Buddhism, where enlightened beings choose to remain in the cycle of rebirth in order to help others achieve liberation. It appears in the Sufi concept of the Qutb, the hidden spiritual axis around which the world revolves. It appears in the Jewish mystical tradition of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, the 36 righteous ones whose merit sustains the world, and who are hidden even from themselves. The tablets participate in what appears to be a global tradition of hidden spiritual governance, and whether one reads this literally or symbolically, the consistency of the pattern across cultures is itself remarkable. Within the halls of Amenti, above the 32 children of light, above the flower of life, above all else, reside the 7 lords. These are the ultimate governing intelligences of the hidden realm, being so far beyond ordinary human comprehension that the text struggles to describe them. They are said to be formless, yet capable of forming. Neither alive nor dead in any human sense, they exist as custodians of cosmic law, as the overseers of human destiny, each holding dominion over a specific aspect of reality. The tablets assign each lord a number, from 3 through 9, and describe their functions with a poetic precision that suggests layers of meaning beneath the surface. The Lord of 3 holds the key of all hidden magic. He is the creator of the halls of the dead, the director of the forces of darkness, not in the sense of being evil, but in the sense of governing the deep, unknown, unrevealed aspects of existence. Darkness, in this context, means the unseen, the unconscious, the territory of the soul that has not yet been illuminated by awareness. He is the one who binds souls to their karmic patterns, ensuring that every action finds its appropriate consequence. The Lord of 4 is the Lord of life itself, a liberator of souls, an opener of pathways. Where the Lord of 3 binds, the Lord of 4 frees. His body is described as filled with light, his face as a living flame. He represents the principle of redemption, the possibility that even the most deeply bound soul can find its way back to freedom. The Lord of 5 is the master of all magic, the holder of the key to the word that resounds among men. This could imply a reference to the power of vibration, of sound, of spoken intention. In many esoteric traditions, the universe is understood to have been created through sound, through a primal vibration that set the cosmos in motion. The Hindu tradition calls this sound Om. The Gospel of John calls it the Word. The Hermetic tradition speaks of the Logos. The Lord of 5, based on this reading, would be the custodian of this principle, the one who guards the creative power of language itself. The Lord of 6 is the Lord of Light, the guardian of the hidden pathway along which souls travel between incarnations. He is the keeper of the passageway between death and rebirth, ensuring that the soul does not lose its way in the vast spaces between lives. The Lord of 7 is the master of vastness, the Lord of space and the holder of the key of time. He governs the fabric of reality itself, the spatial dimensions through which all existence unfolds. He is the closest of the lords to what a physicist might call the geometry of space-time. The Lord of 8 orders the progress and balances the journey of men. He is the administrator, the coordinator, the one who ensures that each soul's evolution proceeds in the right sequence, at the right pace, toward the right destination. If the Lord of 7 governs the field, the Lord of 8 governs the path through it. And finally, the Lord of 9, the supreme among all, the Father, described as vast of countenance, capable of forming and changing from out of the formless. He is called the veiled presence, the consciousness behind all consciousness, the intelligence behind all intelligence, the Lord of Lords. He is the infinite 9, the source from which the other lords draw their power and to which all existence ultimately returns. Thoth describes being granted an audience with these lords, and in their presence being declared the 8th among the children of men, free from the halls of Amenti, master of life, immune to death except by his own will. This declaration is presented not as a reward but as a responsibility, a charge to serve as the bridge between the hidden world of the lords and the surface world of humanity, carrying their teachings upward into the light. A significant portion of the Emerald Tablets is devoted to describing Thoth's journeys beyond the physical body, explorations of the cosmos that he undertakes by separating his consciousness from his material form and travelling freely through what the text describes as the deeper layers of reality. These accounts are among the most visually striking passages in the tablets. Thoth describes leaving his body as a deliberate act, a disciplined technique, not a dream or a hallucination. He rises, he says, through the layers of the atmosphere, past the boundaries of the Earth's gravitational field and into the vast spaces between the stars. He travels to other solar systems, other planets, other dimensions, and what he finds there challenges every assumption about the nature of physical reality. On some of these distant worlds, he encounters races of beings who have mastered what the text calls the ether, the primal, formless substance from which all matter is shaped. These beings do not build their cities with hands or tools, they build with thought alone. Through the focused application of consciousness, they shape the ether into physical structures, cities of rose and gold that hang in the air, sustained not by engineering but by the directed will of their inhabitants. The implication is extraordinary, that consciousness is not a byproduct of matter, but its source, that mind precedes physicality, that the universe is, at its deepest level, a mental construct. This idea, idealism in the philosophical sense, has a long history. The Hindu concept of Maya describes the physical world as an illusion projected by consciousness. The Buddhist tradition speaks of the mind as the creator of all phenomena. The Western idealist philosophers, Berkeley, Hegel, Schopenhauer, argued that reality is fundamentally mental in nature, and in modern physics, the measurement problem in quantum mechanics has led some physicists to suggest that consciousness may play a more fundamental role in the structure of reality than the classical materialist framework allows. The tablets, written decades before these quantum debates became mainstream, present a vision of reality that aligns more closely with the idealist tradition than with the materialism that dominated Western thought for most of the 20th century. On his cosmic journeys, Thoth also arrives at a striking conclusion about human identity. He declares that man is spaceborn, a child of the stars, not of the Earth alone. The physical body, he says, is merely a planet revolving around its own inner sun. This metaphor places human beings within the same cosmic order as the stars and galaxies, not as separate from the universe, but as expressions of the same fundamental processes that govern everything from the orbit of electrons to the rotation of spiral galaxies. He observes that law and order permeate all of existence, from the movements of the greatest celestial bodies to the smallest actions of individual human beings. There is no chaos in Thoth's telling. There is only pattern at different scales, operating at different levels of complexity, but always consistent, always governed by the same underlying principles. An ancient phrase captures this vision in 6 words, and we will return to it before the night is over. But for now, let it sit at the edge of your awareness, like a door you have noticed but not yet opened. Not all of Thoth's cosmic journeys are peaceful. In one of the most unsettling passages in the tablets, he describes an encounter with beings he calls the Hounds of the Barrier, terrifying interdimensional guardians that patrol the boundary of the current cosmic cycle. The Hounds are not physical creatures. They are described as entities that exist in the spaces between dimensions, in the angles of reality, in the folds and crevices of the cosmic structure. They do not pursue souls that stay within the normal channels of existence, but for any consciousness that attempts to cross beyond the boundary of the current cycle, to penetrate into the deeper layers of creation that lie beyond ordinary time and space, the Hounds are waiting. The text describes them as relentless, tireless, and implacable. They pursue their quarry through dimensions that have no name, through spaces that ordinary language cannot describe, and the key detail, the detail that has fascinated readers for decades, is the geometry of their movement. The Hounds of the Barrier, according to the tablets, can only move through angular paths. They follow straight lines and sharp turns. The only protection against them is to move through curves and circles rather than angles. This is the detail that links the Hounds of the Barrier most clearly to their probable literary source, Frank Belknap Long's 1929 short story The Hounds of Tindalos, first published in the March 1929 issue of Weird Tales. In that story, part of the wider Lovecraftian mythos, the titular hounds are creatures that inhabit the angles of time, while benevolent entities inhabit the curves. The protagonist of the story is pursued by these angular beings after he projects his consciousness back through time and they can only enter the physical world through angular surfaces. The parallels are unmistakable, down to the specific detail that circles and curved spaces offer protection against angular predators. But the presence of a literary source does not necessarily strip the concept of its power. The idea that the geometry of space has metaphysical significance, that angles and curves represent different qualities of existence, is not limited to horror fiction. Sacred geometry, which assigns spiritual meaning to geometric forms, is found across cultures. The circle has been a symbol of wholeness, protection, and eternity in traditions from the Celtic to the Chinese. The mandala, a circular diagram of Buddhist and Hindu meditation, is specifically designed to create a sacred curved space in which the meditator is protected from chaotic external forces. The medicine wheel of Native American tradition, the stone circles of Neolithic Europe, the circular layouts of Roman and medieval cities, all reflect an intuition that curved space is qualitatively different from angular space. The tablets take this intuition and crystallize it into a practical teaching. Move in curves, think in spirals, avoid the sharp angles where predatory forces wait. Thoth says he narrowly escaped the hounds by returning to his body and encircling himself, drawing around his form a protective boundary of curved energy. The lesson he draws from this encounter is clear. The cosmos is not entirely safe. There are boundaries, there are guardians, and the seeker who ventures too far, too fast without adequate preparation, risks attracting forces that are far beyond human capacity to resist. Running through the emerald tablets like a dark thread through bright cloth is the teaching of a primordial and unending war, a conflict that has been waged since the earliest ages of the cosmos, long before the rise of Atlantis, long before the formation of the world as we know it. On one side stand the sons of the morning, whom the text also calls the children of light, the 32 beings who dwell in the halls of Amenti, along with their allies and agents on the surface of the earth. They work through harmony, through alignment with cosmic law, through the expansion of consciousness and the cultivation of wisdom. Their methods are subtle. They do not compel. They inspire. They illuminate. They teach. And they operate for the most part in secret, hidden even from those they serve. On the other side stand the Brothers of Darkness, an equally organized, equally secret brotherhood of beings whose purpose is the enslavement of humanity in spiritual ignorance. The Brothers of Darkness do not work openly either. They work, the text says, by entering the minds of men through angles. And here the geometric language of the hounds takes on a psychological dimension. The angles are rigid, binary thinking, polarization, the sharp edges of ideology and dogma. The Brothers of Darkness close a veil around the soul, binding it through fear, through attachment to the material world, through the cultivation of hatred, division, and willful blindness. They dim the light of the soul gradually, imperceptibly, until the person no longer remembers that there was ever any light at all. Against this, the Brothers of Light work by expanding curves, by opening the mind, by dissolving rigidity, by cultivating compassion, wonder, and the capacity for nuance. The battle, in other words, is not between armies, it is between modes of consciousness, between openness and closure, between the curved and the angular, between the flexible and the rigid. Thoth provides a specific practice for protection against the forces of darkness. Draw a circle around yourself, he says. Stand erect within it. Raise your hands upward. Close your eyes and draw in light. Feel it filling you from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet. And then call upon the 7 lords by their names, Untanas, Quertas, Chiatal, Goyana, Huertal, Semveta, and Ardal. These names, rendered phonetically in the translation, are presented as vibrational keys, sounds that, when spoken with focused intention, activate the protective power of the lords and repel the influence of darkness. Whether one understands this practice literally, as a ritual invocation of actual cosmic entities, or symbolically, as a meditative technique for centering the mind and strengthening psychological boundaries, the underlying principle is the same. Protection comes from within. It comes from centeredness, from alignment, from the deliberate cultivation of inner light. The circle is not a wall, it is a state of being. One of the most controversial and widely discussed passages in the Emerald Tablets describes a race of beings that the text calls the Children of Shadows. Earlier, we touched on the corruption that consumed Atlantis, the dimensional gateways, the entities that slipped through. Now the tablets reveal what those entities actually were. These creatures were associated with serpents, summoned from a deep dimensional abyss by ancient humans who were experimenting with dark magic long before the rise of Atlantis. The account is specific and unsettling. These beings, the text says, were formless in their native dimension. They had no physical bodies. They could only exist in the material world through a specific medium, human blood. By means of ritual and sacrifice, ancient sorcerers provided the necessary substrate for these entities to take on physical form, and the form they chose was that of men, outwardly indistinguishable from ordinary humans, but concealing beneath a magical glamour their true nature. Serpent-headed beings, cold-blooded and calculating, whose only purpose was domination. They infiltrated Atlantean society. They replaced the true leaders with their own kind. They ruled from within, hidden in plain sight, guiding the civilization toward the very corruption that would eventually destroy it. Only by a specific sound, a word pronounceable only by humans, by the biological apparatus of the human throat, could their disguise be penetrated and their true form revealed. Thoth warns that these beings still exist. They have not been destroyed. They wait in the places where the old rituals were performed, in the dimensional crevices that were torn open by ancient magic and never fully sealed. And he cautions that, as time passes and humanity forgets, these beings may once again take the semblance of men and walk among us. This passage has, predictably, generated enormous interest and controversy. It has been seized upon by conspiracy theorists as evidence of a literal reptilian ruling class, an idea popularized in the modern era by figures like David Icke, who has argued since the 1990s that shape-shifting reptilian aliens have infiltrated the highest levels of government and finance. The resonance between the tablet's serpent people and Icke's reptilian hypothesis is not coincidental. The tablets are one of the acknowledged sources for this strand of conspiracy thinking, but the serpent motif in the tablets is far older and far more complex than any modern conspiracy theory. Serpents occupy a privileged and ambiguous position in the mythology of virtually every ancient civilization. In the book of Genesis, the serpent in the Garden of Eden is the bringer of forbidden knowledge, the being that offers humanity the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, fundamentally altering the human condition. In Hindu mythology, the Nagas are a race of serpent beings who dwell in a subterranean kingdom called Patala, guarding great treasures of wisdom. In Mesoamerican tradition, the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl Kukulkan, is simultaneously a creator deity and a civilizing force. In Chinese mythology, the dragon, a serpentine being, is the symbol of cosmic power, wisdom, and imperial authority. The Emerald Tablets tap into this universal serpent symbolism and weave it into a narrative of infiltration and concealment. Whether one reads this as a literal account of interdimensional beings, as an allegory for the corruption of power by those who lack genuine human empathy, or as a mythological reflection of humanity's fear of the unknown forces that operate within its own societies, the teaching is consistent. Appearances deceive. Not everything that wears a human face is guided by human values. And the only protection against deception is the cultivation of discernment, the ability to see past surfaces to the reality beneath. Among the most intellectually ambitious passages in the Emerald Tablets are those in which Thoth, in conversation with the Dweller and with the Nine Lords themselves, receives teachings on the fundamental nature of time, space, and existence. The cosmology presented here is sweeping, abstract, and at times remarkably anticipatory of ideas that would not appear in Western science until the 20th century. In the beginning, the text says, there was only void and nothingness, a timeless, spaceless state in which nothing existed and nothing could exist. Into this void came a thought, not a random fluctuation, not an accident, but a purposeful, directed intelligence, an all-pervading intention that filled the emptiness with the first stirring of existence. From this thought arose the law of time and the beginning of all things. Time, in the tablet's telling, is not what we commonly assume it to be. It does not flow like a river. It does not move from past to future in a straight line. Instead, time is described as a force, a structural element that holds events separate from one another, preventing them from collapsing into a single undifferentiated moment. It is consciousness, not time itself, that moves. We travel through time. Time does not travel through us. This distinction may seem subtle, but its implications are profound. If time is a structure rather than a flow, then the past is not gone, and the future is not non-existent. They are simply elsewhere in the structure, accessible to a consciousness that knows how to navigate. Space, too, is presented in terms that challenge ordinary intuition. The tablets describe space as truly bounded by angles and curves. Not infinite, but finite in a complex multidimensional sense. 9 are the interlocked dimensions, the text says. 9 the cycles of space. 9 the diffusions of consciousness. 9 the worlds within worlds. This insistence on the number 9 echoes through the entire text, and while it may be symbolic, some readers have noted a curious resonance with modern mathematical frameworks. String theory, for example, requires 9 or 10 spatial dimensions depending on the formulation to achieve mathematical consistency. Whether this is coincidence, a shared intuition, or something else entirely is an open question. The tablets also describe time as moving through strange angles, a phrase that recalls the angular geometry of the hounds of the barrier. To access the deeper mysteries of time-space, one must move upward and to the right in consciousness, a phrase that may refer to a specific meditative technique, to a direction of attention within the inner landscape, or to a metaphorical orientation toward higher states of awareness. The exact meaning is deliberately obscure. The tablets, like all initiatory texts, leave certain keys unspoken, requiring the reader to supply the missing element through direct experience. Matter, in this cosmology, is not solid or fixed. It is fluid, constantly changing form. All that exists, the text says, is only an aspect of greater things yet to come. This statement frames the entire physical universe as a transitional state, a moment in a larger process of becoming. Nothing is final, nothing is permanent, everything is in motion, moving toward a destination that even the Lords of Amenti have not yet fully comprehended. And here the text delivers one of its most striking lines. Knowledge has never truly been lost, only buried and forgotten by men. This is the central promise of the tablets. The wisdom of the ancients is not extinct. It has not been destroyed by war or catastrophe or the passage of time. It still exists, encoded in the structure of reality itself, waiting to be rediscovered by those who have the patience and the purity to seek it. The Seven Lords, through Thoth, describe a vast hierarchical cosmology of evolving consciousness, a vision of existence organized not as a static hierarchy, but as a living, growing system of nested cycles, each at a different stage of development, each following its own unique path toward an ultimate goal that is never fully reached. Existence, in this teaching, is structured like a series of concentric spheres, or perhaps like the floors of a building with no ceiling. Each cycle of consciousness occupies its own level, learning its own lessons, working with the laws appropriate to its stage of growth. What appears higher or lower in this system is not a judgment of value, but a description of position, like grades in a school, where the first grader is not inferior to the senior, but simply at an earlier point in the same curriculum. Each cycle follows its own unique path. There is no repetition. No two consciousnesses walk the same road. This is a striking teaching, because it implies that the universe is not a machine, grinding out identical outcomes, but a creative process, generating new experiences, new perspectives, new forms of understanding with every cycle. The cosmos in this view is not merely running, it is learning. The ultimate aim of all consciousness at every level is described as perfection and merger with the source of all. But the Lord of Nine, the highest of the Lords, the veiled presence at the summit of the hierarchy, delivers a teaching that may be the most profound in the entire text. Even the great lords themselves are still seeking the goal. Truth, he says, eternally grows and recedes before even the highest of beings. The pursuit of wisdom is infinite. This is not a teaching of arrival. It is a teaching of perpetual becoming. There is no final state, no ultimate resting place, no moment at which the seeker can declare the journey complete. Even the Lord of Nine, who governs the other lords, who stands at the apex of the known hierarchy of consciousness, has not reached the end. The goal recedes as it is approached, not because it is elusive, but because it is genuinely infinite. Understanding deepens without limit. There is always more to know, more to become, more to comprehend. For the listener settling into sleep, there may be something deeply comforting in this teaching. It removes the pressure of arrival. It dissolves the anxiety of not yet being there. If even the Lords of Amenti are still learning, then the journey is not a race. It is not a test. it is the point. The seeking is the finding. The walking is the destination. The Emerald Tablets are not only a cosmological text, they are also, in their later sections, a practical manual, a set of specific instructions for the serious student who wishes to apply the teachings in direct personal practice. These instructions cover three primary areas: the preservation of the physical body, the voluntary departure from life, and the retention of memory through death and rebirth. On the subject of physical preservation, the tablets describe the body as existing in a state of polar balance between positive and negative forces. Death, in this model, is not an inevitable biological event. It is a disruption of balance, a loss of equilibrium between the two poles that sustain physical existence. If this equilibrium can be consciously maintained, the body can be preserved indefinitely. The prescribed practice is specific. Lie with the head pointed north for 1 hour, holding the consciousness in the upper half of the body, from the chest to the crown of the head. Then lie with the head pointed south for 1 hour, holding the consciousness in the lower half of the body, from the chest to the soles of the feet. Perform this practice once every 7 days. The text claims that if this discipline is maintained, the body will retain its full strength and vitality. If neglected for more than 100 years, death will come. The practice is presented without elaboration, without explanation of mechanism. It sits in the text like a technical specification, precise, impersonal, stripped of narrative. One can imagine different responses to it. A scientist would demand evidence. A mystic would attempt the practice and report on the results. A historian would note the similarities to yogic pranayama, to Taoist energy cultivation, to the polarity therapies of alternative medicine. The tablets offer the instruction and leave the evaluation to the reader. On the subject of voluntary departure from physical life, the text describes a method by which a master who wishes to leave the body intentionally may do so. The practitioner lies with the head to the east, folds the hands at what the text calls the source of life, likely the solar plexus or the heart center, and directs the consciousness to split simultaneously north and south. The soul then departs as a silver spark, ascending to the plane of the sons of morning. This is not death in the ordinary sense. It is described as a controlled exit, a transition made by choice, at the appointed time, with full awareness and full mastery. And on the subject that has perhaps generated the most interest of all, and the retention of memory through death and rebirth, the tablets offer a technique that is both simple in its description and extraordinary in its implications. When death approaches, the text says, "Do not tense, do not resist. Resistance is the enemy of transition. Instead, place the flame of the soul, the core of your awareness, in the heart. Feel it there, bright and steady. Then sweep it swiftly upward in a single movement to the seat of what the text calls the triangle, the space between the eyebrows. This is the Ajna chakra in the Hindu tradition, the third eye center in Western occultism. Hold the awareness there, concentrated and unbroken, at the moment of transition. If this is accomplished, the text says, all memories of the life just past will be preserved. The soul will carry its accumulated knowledge and experience into the next incarnation, building upon what came before rather than starting over from scratch. This teaching addresses one of the deepest fears associated with death, not the fear of pain, not the fear of annihilation, but the fear of forgetting, the fear that everything we have learned, everything we have loved, everything we have struggled to understand will be erased at the moment of death, and that we will begin the next life as blank and helpless as we began this one. The tablets offer the possibility, whether real or metaphorical, that this need not be the case, that consciousness, properly directed, can survive the dissolution of the body and carry its contents forward into the future. Beyond the practical instructions, the tablets describe the planes of existence that the soul encounters after physical death, a geography of the afterlife that blends Egyptian mythology with the tablet's unique cosmological framework. The first realm encountered after death is called Duat, a name drawn directly from Egyptian tradition, where the Duat was the underworld through which the sun god Ra travelled each night. In the tablets, Duat is described as the home of the powers of illusion, a realm where reality is not fixed, where appearances shift and change, and where the unprepared soul can be deceived, trapped, or turned back. The guardian of this portal is Osiris, not in his later, popularized form as a green-skinned mummy, but in his more ancient role as the judge of souls, the arbiter of the boundary between the world of the living and the world beyond. Beyond Duat lies a second realm called Arulu, the sphere of heaven-born powers, where what the text calls ___, quote __0 _ dwell. This is Thoth's ultimate destination, the place to which he will ascend when his earthly mission is complete. It is described not as a resting place, but as a realm of active existence, where evolved beings continue to grow, to learn, and to serve the larger processes of cosmic evolution. The text describes 7 mansions existing in the House of the Mighty, each guarded by 3 sentinels. 15 pathways lead to Duat, 42 great powers, echoing the 42 assessors of Mayat in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, sit in judgment over souls seeking passage. 4 sons of Horus and 2 additional guards associated with Isis patrol the thresholds. The numbers are precise, the geography specific, the cast of characters drawn from the deepest layers of Egyptian funerary tradition. The tablets present this afterlife geography as real, not as metaphor, not as poetry, but as an actual landscape that the soul will navigate after the dissolution of the physical body. The text also introduces 2 key concepts from Egyptian psychology, the Bey and the Ka. The Bey, in traditional Egyptian thought, is the personality soul, the unique identity of the individual, often depicted as a bird with a human head, hovering above the mummified body. The Ka is the life force, the double, the energetic template that sustains physical existence. In the tablets, these concepts are framed as keys of life and death, aspects of the soul that the initiate must understand and master in order to navigate the afterlife consciously, rather than as a helpless passenger carried by forces beyond their comprehension. The distinction between conscious and unconscious transition through death is, perhaps, the most important practical teaching in the entire text. The tablets do not deny that everyone dies. What they insist is that the manner of dying, the state of consciousness at the moment of transition, determines the quality of what comes next. A soul that departs in fear, in confusion, in attachment to the material world will experience the afterlife as a disorienting, threatening landscape, full of illusions and obstacles. A soul that departs in clarity, in peace, in full awareness of its own nature and its destination, will experience the same landscape as a familiar path, well lit and navigable, leading to the next stage of its eternal journey. Woven through the emerald tablets is a deep meditation on the number 3, a number that the text treats not as a mere quantity, but as a fundamental structural principle of reality itself. 3 unities exist from the Great One, the text says: equilibrium, one God, one truth, one point of freedom. 3 qualities define the divine nature: infinite power, infinite wisdom, infinite love. 3 circles of existence contain all that is: the circle of light, where only God dwells, the circle of chaos, where things arise from death, and the circle of awareness, where things spring from life. 3 paths are open to the soul: the path of man, the path of liberty, and the path of light. 3 hindrances obstruct spiritual progress: lack of effort to obtain knowledge, non-attachment to the divine, and attachment to evil. The triadic structure is not decorative, it is load-bearing. Every major teaching in the tablets resolves into a trinity, a set of 3 elements that, taken together, describe the full picture. Human nature itself is described as threefold. The physical body is sustained by 3 channels: blood, moving in a vortical motion through the arteries and veins, magnetism, flowing through the nerve pathways, and akasa, a term borrowed from Hindu philosophy, referring to the subtle ether that pervades all space, flowing through invisible channels in the body. These 3 systems are attuned to one another, and together they form the framework through which the deeper energies of life circulate. Beyond the physical, the text describes an astral body, the mediator between the material and the spiritual, belonging to neither realm but capable of moving through both. And beyond the astral lies the mental body, the carrier of will, the arbiter of cause and effect in the individual life. This tripartite model of human nature, body, soul, and spirit, is one of the tablet's teachings that appears with remarkable consistency in traditions across the ancient world. We will explore those parallels later. For now, what matters is the elegance. 3 layers of being, each governed by the number 3, nested inside one another like the chambers of a nautilus shell. Beyond the threefold nature, the text hints at a fourth dimension of being, the spiritual self, existing in four qualities across all planes of existence. This tetradic quality, layered atop the triadic structure, creates a cosmology of remarkable mathematical elegance, a universe built on simple numerical principles that generate infinite complexity through their interactions. The text also includes a striking instruction: the mysteries must be made into a religion in order to preserve their essence, but the secrets within that religion must only be given to those who have been tested and proven pure of heart. This teaching acknowledges a tension that has existed in every mystical tradition, the tension between the need to preserve knowledge by encoding it in public forms, rituals, stories, symbols, institutions, and the need to protect that knowledge from misuse by restricting access to its deepest levels. Religion, in this view, is not the truth itself. It is the vessel that carries the truth, a vessel designed to be understood on multiple levels, offering surface meaning to the many and hidden meaning to the few who have earned it through dedication and inner transformation. Near the end of the tablets, Thoth delivers a sweeping prophecy of humanity's future, a vision that, read today, carries a notable resonance with the actual trajectory of human history, though how much of that resonance reflects genuine foresight versus the historical context of the text's composition is a question each reader must weigh. Civilizations will rise and fall in cycles, he says. Egypt, his beloved Kem-Yod, will be forgotten. Its descendants will move to a higher plane of existence, and barbarian races will come to inhabit the land that was once the cradle of wisdom. But these newcomers too will eventually rise to the light. Nothing is permanent. No decline is final. The cycles continue. Then comes the prophecy that has drawn the most attention. A great age of warfare will come, Thoth says, in a time when mankind has again conquered the ocean, learned to fly in the air like birds, and harnessed lightning. In this age, nation will rise against nation. Dark forces will be wielded as weapons. Half the races of men will be destroyed. Read in the light of the 20th century, with its 2 world wars, its development of aviation, its mastery of electricity, its invention of nuclear weapons, this passage strikes with a force that invites careful consideration. The specific combination of details, conquering the ocean, flying like birds, harnessing lightning, global warfare, the destruction of half of humanity, aligns with the period from roughly 1900 to 1945 with an unsettling precision. However, it is important to note that Doreal was writing in the shadow of the First World War and on the eve of the Second. By the late 1930s, the trajectory toward global industrialized warfare was already visible to attentive observers. The text could reflect genuine prophetic vision, shrewd extrapolation from current events, or the universal pattern of imperial overreach that recurs throughout history. Prophecy, after all, is a flexible art, and sufficiently vivid language can seem to describe many historical periods. But the prophecy does not end in destruction. After the great conflict, Thoth says, the sons of the morning will come forth. They will command men to cease warring against each other. The ancient home of the Atlantean people will rise from beneath the ocean, a literal or symbolic return of the lost wisdom. And an age of light will follow, in which the brothers of light will guide humanity openly, and darkness will be banished. Ultimately, Thoth prophesies that humanity will evolve beyond the physical plane entirely, becoming children of light, moving toward complete unity with the source of all existence. The cosmos itself, he says, is moving in vast cycles toward an unimaginable culmination, a destination so far beyond even the greatest Lord's comprehension that it can only be approached, never described. No text exists in a vacuum. Even if one accepts the tablets as a genuine transmission from an immortal Atlantean priest-king, the language and concepts of the translation inevitably reflect the intellectual world of the translator. And the intellectual world of Maurice Doreal was, in many ways, the world of theosophy, a movement that profoundly shaped the spiritual landscape of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and whose fingerprints are visible on nearly every page of the Emerald Tablets. Theosophy was founded in 1875 in New York City by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a Russian-born mystic, writer and world traveller who claimed to have studied with advanced spiritual masters in Tibet and India. Blavatsky's major works, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, laid out a vast syncretic cosmology that drew on Hinduism, Buddhism, Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Kabbalah, and Egyptian mysticism to construct a unified theory of spiritual evolution. At the heart of her system was the idea that humanity had passed through a series of root races, each corresponding to a different stage of spiritual and physical development, and that the current human race was the fifth in this sequence. The third root race in Blavatsky's scheme was the Lemurians, gigantic semi-ethereal beings who inhabited a continent in the Pacific or Indian Ocean. The fourth root race was the Atlanteans, technologically advanced, psychically gifted, but ultimately corrupted by the misuse of their powers, leading to the catastrophic sinking of their continent. The fifth root race, our own, arose from the remnants of Atlantis and is destined to give way eventually to a sixth and seventh root race, as humanity continues its upward spiral towards spiritual perfection. The parallels with the Emerald Tablets are extensive. The Tablets Atlantis is structurally identical to Blavatsky's Atlantis, a civilization of advanced spiritual knowledge destroyed by moral corruption. The children of light who guide humanity from the halls of Amenti closely mirror the Mahatmas or ascended masters of theosophical doctrine, evolved beings who have completed their human evolution and now work behind the scenes to guide the rest of humanity forward. The Great White Lodge that Doriel claimed authorized him to translate the tablets is the same Great White Brotherhood invoked by Blavatsky and her successors. Even the structure of the cosmos described in the tablets, with its nested cycles of consciousness, its hierarchical planes of existence, its emphasis on the evolution of the soul through successive incarnations, maps closely onto the theosophical framework. The 7 planes of existence in theosophy, physical, astral, mental, intuitional, spiritual, monadic, and divine, correspond to the 7-layered structure that runs through the tablets. The emphasis on karma, the idea that every action generates an appropriate consequence, is central to both systems, and the concept of reincarnation as a mechanism for learning and growth rather than as a punishment is shared by both traditions. Blavatsky herself drew heavily on the figure of Thoth. In Isis Unveiled, she discusses the Hermetic tradition at length, tracing the lineage of Western esoteric thought from the Egyptian temples through the Greek mystery schools and into the alchemical laboratories of medieval Europe. She presents Hermes Trismegistus, the Hellenistic fusion of Thoth and Hermes, as one of the great spiritual teachers of antiquity, a conduit for the primordial wisdom that theosophy claimed to restore. Doriel, in producing the Emerald Tablets, was not working in isolation. He was working within a well-established tradition that had already identified Thoth as a figure of supreme importance and Atlantis as the lost cradle of human wisdom. None of this diminishes the experiential power of the text. A painting is not less beautiful because you can identify the pigments. A symphony is not less moving because you understand the theory of harmony. To trace the intellectual lineage of the Emerald Tablets is not to debunk them. It is to understand them more fully, to see them not as artifacts dropped from the sky, but as products of a living tradition of spiritual inquiry that has been developing, evolving, and deepening for thousands of years. The phrase that defines the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below, appears not in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, but in the original medieval Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. And yet the principle it encapsulates saturates every page of the text we have been exploring tonight. It is, in a sense, the secret architecture of the tablets, the organizing principle that holds the entire cosmology together. The idea is deceptively simple. The structure of the cosmos is mirrored in the structure of the individual. The forces that govern the movements of galaxies are the same forces that govern the movements of atoms, and the same forces that govern the movements of the human soul. To understand one level of reality is to understand all levels, because the same patterns repeat at every scale. In the tablets, this principle manifests in multiple ways. The 7 lords of Amenti correspond to 7 centers of energy within the human body, what the Hindu tradition calls chakras, what the Taoist tradition calls dantians, what the Western alchemical tradition calls the 7 metals. The cosmic journey from darkness to light that the tablets describe as the destiny of the universe is mirrored in the personal journey from ignorance to wisdom that every individual soul must undertake. The flower of life at the centre of Amenti is reflected in the vital force at the centre of every human being, the spark of consciousness that animates the body and survives its dissolution. In 1908, roughly 3 decades before Doriel published the tablets, a small book appeared under the title The Kybalion, attributed to 3 initiates. This anonymous work, widely believed to have been written by William Walker Atkinson, a prominent figure in the New Thought movement, distilled the core principles of the Hermetic tradition into 7 laws: mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. The Kabbalions' influence on early 20th century esoteric thought was immense, and its fingerprints are clearly visible in the tablets. The principle of mentalism, that the universe is fundamentally mental in nature, is the basis of Thoth's description of advanced beings who build cities through thought alone. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, structures the entire hierarchy of the tablet's cosmos. The principle of vibration, that everything in the universe is in constant motion, vibrating at different frequencies, underlies the tablet's emphasis on sound, on the power of the spoken word, on the vibrational keys that unlock the halls of Amenti. The principle of polarity, that everything has its pair of opposites, and that opposites are identical in nature but different in degree, explains the tablet's model of the body as a balance of positive and negative forces whose equilibrium determines life and death. The principle of rhythm, that everything flows, moves in and out, rises and falls, swings back and forth, is the engine of the tablet's prophetic vision, with its cycles of civilization rising and falling, of darkness giving way to light and light, again succumbing to darkness, endlessly until the final consummation. The principle of cause and effect, that every cause has its effect and every effect has its cause, is the foundation of the tablet's moral teaching, in which the 7 lords ensure that every action finds its appropriate consequence. And the principle of gender, that everything has its masculine and feminine aspects, its active and receptive qualities, appears in the tablet's description of the threefold nature of the human being, with its active mental body, its receptive astral body, and the physical body that mediates between them. The tablets, in other words, are not a standalone document. They are a node in a vast network of interconnected ideas, a network that stretches from the temples of Hermopolis to the libraries of Alexandria, from the alchemical workshops of medieval Europe to the theosophical lodges of 19th century India, from the New Thought lecture halls of early 20th century America to the YouTube channels and meditation apps of the present day. To encounter the tablets is to encounter this entire tradition, compressed, distilled, and presented in a voice that makes it feel immediate, personal, and urgent. One of the most striking things about the Emerald Tablets, when read with an awareness of the world's spiritual traditions, is how many of their core teachings appear, in different language, with different imagery, but with the same underlying structure, in traditions that developed independently across the globe. The tablet's description of the halls of Amenti as an underground realm where immortal beings guide humanity from within has a direct parallel in the Tibetan Buddhist concept of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom, sometimes described as existing beneath the surface of the earth, where enlightened beings preserve the teachings of the Dharma and prepare for the coming of a future age of peace. The Kalachakra Tantra, one of the most complex texts in the Tibetan Buddhist canon, describes Shambhala as a real place, geographically inaccessible, surrounded by snow mountains governed by a line of enlightened kings who will eventually emerge to defeat the forces of barbarism and establish a golden age. The structural similarity to Thoth's Amenti, hidden masters, subterranean location, cyclical prophecy of future emergence, is unmistakable. In the Hindu tradition, the concept of the Akashic records describes a cosmic library, an etheric repository of every thought, word, and action that has ever occurred in the universe, accessible to those who have developed the necessary spiritual faculties. Thoth's claim that knowledge has never truly been lost, only buried and forgotten by men, resonates strongly with this idea. The wisdom of the past is not gone. It exists in a dimension adjacent to our own, preserved in the fabric of reality itself, waiting to be accessed by those who know how to look. The tablet's emphasis on the power of sound, the vibrational keys, the sacred names, the word that resounds among men, finds its echo in the Vedic concept of Nada Brahma, the universe as sound, reality as vibration, the cosmic syllable Om as the fundamental frequency from which all existence emanates. In the Sufi tradition, the concept of the kun, the creative command, quote 1, by which God brings the universe into existence through a single word, carries the same implication. That sound is not merely a physical phenomenon, but a creative force with the power to shape reality at its deepest level. The tablet's teaching on the preservation of consciousness through death, the technique of focusing awareness at the third eye center at the moment of transition, is virtually identical to the practices described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol. In that text, the dying person is instructed to maintain lucid awareness through the dissolution of the elements, to recognize the clear light that appears at the moment of death as the true nature of their own mind, and to direct their consciousness toward liberation rather than allowing it to be swept along by the currents of habitual fear and attachment. The Bardo Thodol was first translated into English in 1927 by Walter Evans Wentz, just a few years before Doriel began publishing his work. Whether Doriel was directly influenced by Evans Wentz's translation is unknown, but the convergence of the two texts is remarkable regardless. The tablet's model of the soul as tripartite, physical, astral and mental, maps onto the three bodies of Hindu philosophy: the Sthula Sharira, gross body, the Sukshma Sharira, subtle body, and the Karana Sharira, causal body. It maps onto the three souls of Taoism: the Po, earthly soul, the Hun, heavenly soul, and the Shen, spirit. It maps onto the three parts of the human being in Plato's Republic: the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational. The same triadic structure appears in the three gunas of Hindu thought: tamas, inertia, rajas, activity, and sattva, harmony, and in the three pillars of the Kabbalistic tree of life: severity, mercy, and the middle pillar that reconciles them. The question is not whether these parallels are coincidental. The question is what they mean. If the same ideas appear independently in Egypt, India, Tibet, China, Greece, and pre-Columbian America, there are only a few possible explanations. One is that all these traditions descend from a single, common source, a proto-civilization, perhaps Atlantis itself, that disseminated its knowledge across the world before its destruction. This is the explanation the tablets themselves would prefer. Another is that these ideas represent fundamental truths about the structure of consciousness and reality, truth that any sufficiently advanced spiritual tradition will eventually discover, just as any sufficiently advanced mathematical tradition will eventually discover the theorem of Pythagoras. A third explanation is that the human mind, regardless of culture, follows predictable patterns in its attempt to make sense of existence, and that the similarities reflect the structure of the mind rather than the structure of reality. None of these explanations can be definitively proven. All of them carry weight, and the fact that we cannot settle the question is itself part of the tablet's enduring power. They sit at the intersection of myth and truth, of history and imagination, of the personal and the cosmic, and in that space, in that ambiguity, they open a door that more definitive texts cannot. They invite you not to believe, but to wonder. And wonder, as Aristotle observed at the very dawn of Western philosophy, is the beginning of wisdom. We cannot discuss the Emerald Tablets without lingering for a moment on the monument that the text claims Thoth built, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Whatever one believes about the tablet's claims of authorship, the pyramid itself remains one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history, and the mysteries surrounding it are not inventions of the esoteric tradition. They are legitimate questions that mainstream scholarship has not fully resolved. The Great Pyramid was, for over 3,800 years, the tallest structure on Earth. It consists of an estimated 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing over 80 tons. It was oriented to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a single degree, a precision that was not matched by any other structure until the construction of the Paris Observatory in the 17th century. Its base is level to within 2.1 centimetres across a perimeter of over 900 metres. The ratio of its perimeter to its height approximates 2 pi to a remarkable degree of accuracy, a mathematical relationship that has never been satisfactorily explained as accidental. No contemporary Egyptian text describes how it was built. The famous account by the Greek historian Herodotus, written 2,000 years after the pyramid's construction, describes a system of levers and ramps, but Herodotus himself acknowledged that he was reporting second-hand. The quarry marks that date the structure to Khufu's reign say nothing about the methods used. Modern engineering estimates suggest that, even with the most optimistic assumptions about workforce size and efficiency, the construction of the pyramid would have required placing one block every 2 to 3 minutes, continuously, for 20 years. How this was achieved with copper tools and no wheeled vehicles remains an open question. The internal structure of the pyramid is no less enigmatic. The Grand Gallery, a corbelled passage over 47 metres long and nearly 9 metres high, is an architectural feature without parallel in any other known Egyptian structure of the period. The King's Chamber, lined with precisely fitted granite slabs transported from Aswan, over 800 kilometres to the south, contains a single, unadorned sarcophagus that was too large to have been carried through the existing passages, implying that it was placed during construction, with the chamber built around it. Above the King's Chamber, 5 relieving chambers, stacked one atop the other, distribute the immense weight of the stone above and prevent the roof from collapsing, a feat of structural engineering that demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of load distribution. The tablets claim that the pyramid was designed not as a tomb, but as an energy device, a structure whose geometry channeled cosmic forces toward a specific point, is of course not supported by mainstream Egyptology, but it is worth noting that the pyramid's geometry does exhibit unusual properties. The angles of the passage slopes, the dimensions of the chambers, and the overall proportions of the structure have been found, by various researchers, to encode mathematical relationships that go beyond what would be expected from a purely functional tomb design. Whether these relationships were intentional or emergent, whether they reflect design or coincidence, is another of the pyramid's unsettled questions. The tablets do not ask you to abandon science in favour of mysticism. They ask you to consider the possibility that the ancient world was more sophisticated than the textbook version allows, that the monuments we see on the surface are the visible tips of a knowledge tradition that extends far deeper and far further back than conventional dating permits. This is a proposition that can be entertained without abandoning critical thinking. It requires only the willingness to hold the question open, to admit that what we do not know about the ancient past may be as significant as what we do know. It is worth pausing to consider why the Emerald Tablets have found such a vast and growing audience in the 21st century, an era dominated by empiricism, by data, by the relentless machinery of scientific materialism. By every rational measure, a text attributed to an immortal priest-king of a sunken continent, published by an occultist in Colorado in the 1930s, should have vanished into obscurity long ago. Instead, it has become one of the most widely circulated spiritual texts on the internet. Its phrases appear in music, in visual art, in tattoo parlours, in meditation circles, in the names of podcasts and clothing brands. Something about this text resonates with the contemporary mind in a way that its author, whoever he was, could not have anticipated. Part of the explanation is technological. The internet has done for esoteric literature what the printing press did for the Bible. It has removed the gatekeepers. Texts that were once available only through specialised bookshops, mail-order catalogues, or membership in specific organisations can now be found, read, and shared by anyone with a connection to the web. The Emerald Tablets, once circulated in cheap mimeographed pamphlets among the members of a small Colorado-based brotherhood, are now available on websites, in audiobook format, in dozens of YouTube readings, in Reddit discussions, and in the recommendation algorithms that introduce millions of people to material they would never have encountered through traditional channels. But availability alone does not explain resonance. The deeper reason for the tablet's modern appeal may lie in the specific anxieties of the present moment. We live in an age of unprecedented material abundance and unprecedented spiritual hunger. The traditional religions that once provided the framework for understanding birth, death, meaning and purpose have for many people lost their authority, not because their teachings are false, but because the institutions that carry those teachings have been compromised by scandal, rigidity, and the inability to speak to the actual conditions of contemporary life. Science, which was supposed to fill the gap, has succeeded spectacularly at describing how the world works, but has remained deliberately silent on the question of why it works, or whether the question even has an answer. Into this vacuum, the Emerald Tablets arrive with a message that speaks directly to the modern predicament. They offer a vision of the universe as purposeful, as guided, as moving toward a destination that is luminous and good. They offer the promise that consciousness survives death, that individual existence has meaning, that the suffering and confusion of ordinary life are not the final word. They offer these things without the institutional baggage of organized religion, without the requirement of doctrinal conformity, without the need to join any group or pledge allegiance to any authority. The tablets are, in this sense, perfectly suited to the age of the spiritual but not religious, the age in which millions of people hunger for transcendence, but refuse to accept it from the hands of any institution they do not trust. There is also the matter of the tablets' aesthetic. They are beautiful. The language, even in translation, even filtered through Dorial's early 20th century prose, has a cadence and a gravity that is genuinely moving. The imagery is vivid, specific, and endlessly generative. The flower of fire at the centre of Amenti, the 32 thrones, the hounds that move through angles, the silver spark of the departing soul, the serpent-headed ones beneath their glamour of human flesh. These images lodge in the mind and do not leave. They populate the imagination with a mythology that feels, for many readers, more real and more alive than the sterilized narratives of a disenchanted world. And there is, perhaps, something else, something harder to name. There is a quality in the tablets that functions like a mirror. When you read them, you see yourself, your own questions, your own fears, your own deepest intuitions about the nature of reality. The text is specific enough to create a world, but open enough to allow the reader to inhabit that world on their own terms. It does not demand belief. It invites contemplation. It does not close doors. It opens them, and leaves the reader standing at the threshold, free to enter or to turn away. This quality, the quality of the open door, may be the truest legacy of the Emerald Tablets. In an age of closed systems, of algorithmic certainty, of binary thinking and tribal allegiance, the tablets offer something increasingly rare, a space in which the mind is free to wander, to entertain possibilities without committing to conclusions. They offer, in other words, the experience of mystery, not as ignorance, but as depth, not as the absence of knowledge, but as the presence of something so vast that knowledge, however much of it we accumulate, will never fully contain it. And that, perhaps, is what keeps people coming back. Not the answers, the questions, the beautiful, luminous, inexhaustible questions. Thoth closes the tablets with a series of parting commands and a blessing that is both tender and severe. Guard the entrance to the halls of Amenti, he says. Do not cast the wisdom before the unprepared. Keep the secrets for those who seek the light. This is not elitism. It is pragmatism. The deepest teachings in every tradition are dangerous in the hands of the untrained, not because they are evil, but because they are powerful, and power without wisdom is destructive. A scalpel in the hands of a surgeon saves lives. The same scalpel in the hands of a child is a catastrophe. Thoth's instruction to guard the teachings is an instruction to pair power with preparation, knowledge with responsibility, access with readiness. He provides a method for summoning his presence after his departure. Use his name 3 times, he says. The specific invocation is rendered phonetically. __quote_0___. This triadic calling, 3 names spoken 3 times, is consistent with the text's emphasis on the power of vibration and the sacred significance of the number 3. When initiates have passed all outer trials and approach through the key held by the priests, Thoth promises to come forth from the halls of Amenti to receive them and to grant them the words of power. He warns sternly that only the pure of heart, strong of wisdom, and firm of purpose should be brought to this threshold. The warning is repeated with an intensity that suggests personal experience, as though Thoth has seen, across his vast lifespan, what happens when the unready are given access to the hidden chambers of reality. And then comes his final teaching, perhaps the most important sentence in the entire text. The gateway to life, he says, is through death, not physical death, but the death of the ego, the dissolution of the small self, the narrow identity, the fearful, grasping, defensive personality that we mistake for who we truly are. Through this inner death, this surrender of everything we think we know about ourselves, comes the fire and light of true life, the real life, the life that the tablets have been describing from the very first page. This is not a unique teaching. It appears in the Christian tradition as the call to be born again, to die to the old self and be resurrected in spirit. It appears in Sufism as Fana, the annihilation of the ego in the divine. It appears in Buddhism as the realization of anatta, the absence of a fixed, permanent self. It appears in the Zen tradition as the experience of satori, the sudden dissolution of the barrier between self and world. The Emerald Tablets place this universal insight at the very centre of their message. You cannot enter the light while clinging to the darkness of your own small story. Let go. Let the old self die. And what remains, what has always been there, beneath the layers of fear and conditioning and habit, is the truth. Thoth's final words are a promise. He will dwell in Amenti, he says, until the age of darkness has passed. When light comes again to man, he will return. The voice falls silent. The tablets end. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, occupy a strange and singular place in the landscape of spiritual literature. They are not an ancient text in the way that the Vedas or the Egyptian Book of the Dead are ancient. They are not a scriptural text in the way that the Bible or the Quran are scriptural. They are not a philosophical text in the way that the Corpus Hermeticum or the Tao Te Ching are philosophical. They are something else, a modern text that draws on ancient sources, a syncretic work that weaves together threads from Egyptian religion, Hermetic philosophy, theosophical cosmology, Hindu metaphysics, and early 20th century speculative fiction into a tapestry that, against all probability, coheres. The man who wrote or translated them, Maurice Durrell, born Claude Dodgin of Oklahoma, was no academic. He was an occultist, a visionary, a cult leader, and ultimately a doomsday prophet who moved his followers to a mountain valley near Sedalia, Colorado, to wait out a nuclear war he predicted would come in 1953. It never did. He died in 1963, and his organization, the Brotherhood of the White Temple, continues to this day, still publishing his writings, still guarding the text he brought into the world. And yet the text has outlived its author's biography. It has been embraced by people who have no connection to the Brotherhood, no interest in Doriel's personal history, no allegiance to any organization. It has travelled further than the man who released it could have imagined, carried not by institutions, but by something harder to name, a quality of resonance, a feeling when you encounter the text that it is speaking to a part of you that other texts do not reach. We have already considered why, the aesthetic, the hunger of the age, the open door, but beneath all those explanations there may be something simpler. The Emerald Tablets promise that the darkness is temporary, that the light is coming, that the wisdom we have lost can be recovered, that the forces of chaos and deception, however powerful they may seem, are operating on borrowed time, that the universe is moving, however slowly, towards something magnificent, toward a culmination so vast and so luminous that even the lords of Amenti, even the Lord of Nine, even the highest consciousness in the known cosmos cannot fully comprehend it. That is a promise worth falling asleep to. The tablets are silent now. Thoth has spoken his last, retreated to his hidden halls, and the surface world moves on, cities rising and falling, technologies born and forgotten, civilizations blooming and withering like flowers in a field that has no edge. But somewhere beneath the stone and the sand and the ocean and the silence, the light remains. The flower at the centre of Amenti continues to burn. The 32 thrones are occupied, the 7 lords hold their stations, and the promise stands. When the age of darkness passes, when human beings remember what they are and where they came from and what they are capable of, the halls will open, the teacher will return, the light will be restored. Until then, there is the seeking, there is the stillness, there is the slow, patient work of turning the mind toward the light and letting the darkness dissolve. Not through force, not through struggle, but through the quiet, persistent act of choosing to remember. Breathe slowly. Let the weight of the day settle. Let the stories and the symbols and the numbers and the names drift through you like smoke through an open window, touching everything, clinging to nothing. You do not need to hold them. They will hold you. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of all memory, all emotion, all identity. When you were judged in the hall of truth, it was not your mind that was weighed. It was your heart. And the question was not what you knew, but how you had lived. Whether your heart was light, buoyant, unburdened by the weight of cruelty and regret, or whether it sank beneath the feather of Maat, heavy with the things you had done and failed to do. Tonight, let your heart be light. Let it rest upon the scales and find them balanced. Whatever you have done today, whatever you have failed to do, whatever burdens you have carried, set them down. Here, now. In the silence between one breath and the next, the halls of Amenti are patient. The lords do not rush, and the light at the centre of everything is not going anywhere. It will be there when you wake, It will be there when you sleep. It has always been there. Think of the ibis, the sacred bird of Thoth, standing at the edge of the Nile in the blue hour before dawn, patient, still, its long curved beak, like a crescent moon, the Egyptians thought, poised above the dark water, waiting for the moment of clarity that will come without effort, without force, simply through the act of being present. That is the posture the tablets commend. Not striving, not grasping, watching, waiting, trusting that the light knows its way. The Nile floods and recedes, the stars wheel overhead in their ancient circuits, the pyramids stand in the desert, their limestone faces warmed by the same sun that warmed them when they were new, when the casing stones gleamed white and gold in the morning light, and the whole plateau blazed like a fallen constellation. Somewhere beneath them, if the tablets are to be believed, the entrance to the halls of Amenti still waits. The crystal at the apex still draws its invisible current from the cosmos. The Sphinx still guards its secret, its face worn smooth by thousands of years of wind and sand, its eyes gazing east toward the place where the sun rises, the place where all journeys begin again, and somewhere, in the quietest chamber of your own consciousness, in the space between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats, in the threshold between waking and sleep, the same light burns, small perhaps, flickering, but steady, always steady. The same light that the tablets describe as the flower of life, the same light that Thoth says he carried from Atlantis to Egypt, the same light that the seven lords guard in their formless eternity beneath the world. It is not somewhere else. It is here. It has always been here, and it will still be here when you open your eyes in the morning, and the day begins anew, and the ancient cycle continues its long, slow, luminous turn toward the dawn that never quite arrives and never quite departs. Sleep now. Let the tablets do their quiet work. Let the words you have heard tonight settle into the deep soil of the mind, where seeds are planted in darkness and grow toward a light they cannot see but somehow know is there. You do not need to understand everything tonight. Understanding comes in its own time, at its own pace, in its own way. The lords of Amenti have been patient for tens of thousands of years. You can afford to be patient too. If this story stayed with you, if you find yourself thinking about it tomorrow, or the next day, or a week from now, consider leaving a like. It tells us you are here and it helps other travellers find their way to this place. If you'd like to continue, there are more stories waiting in the playlist. More ancient mysteries, more quiet explorations, more doorways into the deep past. And if something we said tonight sparked a thought, a memory, a question of your own, share it in the comments. This is a community of seekers, and every voice adds something to the conversation. Until next time, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, sleep well and dream deep. Good night.